right, folks. You know, we love to talk about setting records and everything else on this show. And it's always fun to look at, you know, who scored the most touchdowns or, you know, who's had the most interceptions, you know, in the history of Texas high school football. But you know what we never talk about and what I never hear about?
Special teams.
Special teams. Whoa, 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 whoa. So that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about all the way from who's kicked the most field goals, who's the most consecutive PATs in a row, the longest punt returns. We're going to talk about it all right here on Women Talking Football. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. Starting off, let's talk about field goal records. And first up on the list, single season field goals. And starting us off at 25 field goals in a single season. You're quite familiar with him. It's Cole Headland of Argyle back in 2011. He actually played at he played at Arkansas first, then transferred to UNT. Caw, of course, and then signed on as a free agent with the Indianapolis Colts. But you knew him personally, didn't you?
I did, yeah. So Cole was at UNT. I believe his senior year was my freshman year, but I had his senior year might have been my sophomore year. I might have gotten 2 years of Cole being our kicker. I believe that was correct.
Okay, gotcha.
That being said, I also knew Cole from the perspective of his father, John Headland, is the outstanding UNT women's soccer team.
Coach.
And he's been the only soccer coach for the entire history of UNT women's soccer, which I believe, now that's probably up to 28 or 29 years, and they've never had a losing season.
Which is insane.
Ever. Their conference championships, I mean, they have been through their time in Conference USA, they were the dominant. I didn't have a good word to put after that. They were they were the dominant, period. They were the dominant.
The team to beat, basically.
No,
they always are the team to beat. And whether that's Conference USA or the American, whatever, like, they are the team to beat. And it's crazy to see that, like, obviously his son is going to be an unbelievable kicker as well, right?
you would assume he also played soccer.
Correct. Exactly.
But yeah, no, he was incredibly talented. But dad coach had a little bit to do with that. John Headland, a great guy. The whole Headland family, great. But yeah, the moment I saw this graphic, I was like, my guy.
Yeah, exactly. And what's crazy about looking at this is that not only does he hold first place, but he also holds second place too at 24. Back in 2013 at Argyle as well.
Makes you wonder what he did in 2012, slacker.
Slacker, man. I know. It's like...
Could have had 1, 2, 3. Come on, Cole.
Exactly. And then if you look over to the right in career field goals, at number 1, it's no shocker. 58 is Cole Headland of Argyle, 2011 to 2013. And, like, it's just crazy, like, to see how, like, making that many, you know, in a single season, and it is crazy, right? But then seeing it over a small span of time, 58, that's just a crazy, crazy number to me.
Which makes sense because in 2013, Argyle won state.
Right, exactly. And that actually has a lot to do with a lot of these numbers and all of these records setting.
How many games did you play?
And a lot of these played 15, 16 games, right, in a single season. So that helps a lot too. If you look down there at Garrett Hartley, we are not related.
Cousin Garrett.
That is Cousin Garrett. I'm kidding. That's not. That's definitely not. We're not related at all. But he played at South Lake Carroll under Todd Dodge in 2001 to 2003 and kicked 42 field goals in his time there. And then he, I believe, set a record too. He played at OU and then he set a record with the New Orleans Saints. And it's now surpassed, but it was for the most consecutive successful field goals to start a career, and then became the first kicker in the NFL to convert 3 field goals of more than 40 yards in a Super Bowl. So he's a Texas guy, and he's set numerous records in the NFL. Of course, one being surpassed, but that's crazy.
Well, and there's a couple things to break down here. One, also a state championship in 2002 under Todd Dodge.
Correct.
Graduated right before the 2004 one. But regardless, going back to that, think about where we're at in the kicking game now, in field goal kicking game now in the NFL. He was the first player, this is early 2000s obviously, to kick 3 consecutive field goals 40 yards or longer. That, to me, if you're watching the NFL, feels like a pretty average field goal now.
Right.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah, it's seriously
I
crazy.
mean, we've got guys out there going 60 plus.
I know,
and
right?
now making 360 plus in a row would be
That's
absurd.
Yeah.
And I
That's a tough one.
still think on an average basis, probably making, I don't know, maybe like 45 and out.
That's still impressive.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
That takes a leg. I mean,
Yeah.
that takes a lot of strength to do consecutively. No, and we'll talk about consecutive PATs and field goals here in a second. But I mean, to do that in a career in only realistically three, maybe 4 seasons is just very impressive.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see the number of guys this year that made 3 consecutive field goals over 40 yards.
Yeah, I know, because it's probably not very many. So
I would say it's probably more.
You think it's more?
Well, I don't think like many, but like I would say, man, 3 or 4 guys maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
Which
so.
I mean, you got to put it in perspective too. There's 32 teams, so it's not like many.
Right.
There's 32 kickers.
Right.
You know.
Right. Yeah, that's true. I guess you're right. All right, let's go ahead and move it right along, and we'll look at point after touchdown records now. Starting off with single game PATs. Leading off the pack is Raymond Dodd at 14. He kicked 14 PATs in the Wink versus Sanderson game in 1981.
Jeez. What was the score of
I was
that
going to
game?
say, that's a lot of touchdowns.
Yeah.
I didn't write down the score, but I bet you that 14 though, right? I mean, back in 1981, I mean, gosh, that's got to be, I mean, if you've got 6 points worth of touchdown, right? And you kicked 14 PATs. I mean,
that's 14 touchdowns.
Yeah. That's insane, right?
You're not kicking a PAT on anything else.
Exactly. I mean, I don't know what that math is in my head, but like that's just a crazy number of points too.
Yeah.
Like that's a lot.
98. 98 points.
Yeah.
If you did 7 times 14.
I wonder what the actual score to that game was.
I don't know.
That's insane though. And then moving on to single season PATs. In a single season, Chance Nevarez of Aledo back in 2013 kicked 132 PATs in a single season.
Lord.
That's a lot. I mean, that's just thinking about that number, like I think 14 in a game is a lot, but 132, if you're doing that in a single season, how many is that per game realistically?
Yeah.
If you're taking,
they won state that year, so if you do 132 divided by 16,
which is 132 divided by
8.25,
16,
you're averaging 8
PATs a game.
Over 8 PATs a game?
Yeah, sometimes 9, maybe a little bit less than that. Like that's
ridiculous.
Yeah.
Which
that's
again is
absolutely
probably
ridiculous.
why Aledo won the state championship.
100%. And then we'll just kind of go right into it. If you look over to the right in consecutive PATs converted, Chance Nevarez also sits at the top of that list with 207. So 207 times he consecutively made that many PATs in a row.
That's Mr. Automatic at that point. Like,
oh yeah,
you have to feel so good about that. And yeah, I dodged.
Right.
That's insane.
Exactly. And then, so if you look down on that same list, Trey McTaggart as well in Munster, they actually won their first ever state title that year too. So that also helped a lot with, being that consecutive and playing that many games in a row. That obviously that helps a little bit. And then we'll round it all out here with career PATs. And leading the pack here is Adolfo Cordero from Refugio back in 2011 to 2013. He kicked 308 PATs. Not in a row, just in total. 308, which is, again, that's an insane number. All right, let's go ahead and round this segment out here with special teams records. Now, this is kind of a hodgepodge of different records here because I didn't really know how to name this segment. I kind of just looked at, longest so-and-so, and we'll kind of group them all together. But starting off with the longest field goal, all of these guys kicked 62-yard field goals, but leading the pack, which is the most recent one, is David Leverton in the Midland versus Odessa Permian game back in 1995. And I looked him up because I was curious about kind of his history and where he did, and he kicked for the University of Tennessee for a little bit.
Wow.
I also found out that the kicker for Midland Greenwood back in 2022, his name was Rance Purser. He almost tied that 62-yard field goal record with a 61-yarder in one of their games that season. So very, very close, but no cigar. So all three of those guys have tied for the longest field goal in Texas high school football history at 62. And the longest punt in Texas high school football history, Gary Bolin holds that crown at 97 yards, and he did that in the McCamey versus Stanton game back in 1969. And now the longest field goal return. This one is a little odd because obviously you have a max there, and a lot of guys in the Texas high school football record books have hit that max. So I literally just listed I think there was like 5 or 6 guys that have done that in our history books. But I just listed the guy here that's done it most recently because there's just no point in listing 8 guys that have 109, field goal, the longest field goal return, which is 109. And it was David Gonzalez in the Shearland versus La Jolla game back in 2011, and of course 109 yards there. And the longest punt return was back in 1976. It was David Scott in the Jasper versus Silsbee game, and that was 108 yards. And then I did have something that I wanted to say. Maybe it was, I do have something I think about, maybe it was a punt, I don't remember. I did have something.
I do want to say, I think we miscalculated on one of the career PATs because I went back in the memory bank and I was like, wait, that was broken this year. It was Armando Chavez out of Mart. He had 352 this year, which broke the national record. Oh my gosh, the national record.
Yeah. Okay.
So
we'll have to update that.
Yeah, we need to update that one. But when I was sitting there, sorry, that's what I've been doing. I was sitting there going, wait, that's not right on the career PATs.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
But yeah, Armando Chavez out of Mart, he hit one this year at Mary Hardin Baylor Stadium, I think, that put him over.
Was that a playoff game?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh my gosh, how cool!
But yeah,
we'll have to update
Chavez.
that. So yeah, so I'm using the magazine from obviously last year, the one with Sunny Banks on it.
That's why it's not in it.
Right, yep. Exactly. It's almost up to date, except that. So we'll go ahead and update our record books there. Apologies to him, but that's awesome. Good for him. I remember what I was saying. So going back to the longest punt for the Gary Bolin, McCamey versus Stanton back in 1969 with 97 yards, I found this website and I was kind of just digging around and looking at records and stuff. And it's a literal punting website. It's called Long Punts. And it lists the longest punts in all sorts of different divisions, like the NFL, the AFL, CFL, semi-pro, college, and high school. And this is national too. And Gary Bolin ranks 6th nationally for the longest punt ever made in the high school ranks nationally. So there's something you probably didn't know.
There you go.
From my punt website that I found.
Because everybody's got to have a good punt website.
Correct. Punters deserve lots of love too. Anyways, moving right along here, the longest kickoff return. This was kind of the same thing here with the longest field goal return. It's like you hit a max already, and then all of the guys already listed on there were at 109. So I just picked the most recent, which was Andy Reyna of Laredo Martin versus Laredo. Do you know how to say that?
Yeah, Cigarroa.
Yeah, Cigarroa, back in 2004. So a bunch of those guys there hitting that 109 mark, which is very impressive, but I just listed the most recent one.
Yeah,
there.
because if it was 110, they would be standing on the white line.
Correct. And that's
of the end zone.
Correct. Exactly. So
That,
that's
my
why I was like,
friends,
I'll
would
just
be
go
a
ahead and list.
touchback.
Correct. So
That's why
I was
109
like,
is the longest that you can go.
Right, exactly. So I was like, I'll just list the most recent one.
Yeah.
I think that makes the most sense. And then, of course, to round it all out, looking at the longest blocked PAT return, which was set by Lorenzo Foreman, of course, it being 109 yards in the Liberty versus Splendor game back in 2004. And I was looking at that list and I was like, Daniel Brooks, that looks super familiar. But I remember he played back at OU, I think, after his season there at Port Lavaca Calhoun. Because I was like, I remember that name somewhere. I remember it was just lodged in the back of my brain. But I remember that name and I looked him up. I was like, I think I've definitely watched him in an OU game before.
See, and you know what's funny? And I'm not taking away anything from like these longest kickoff returns or longest block PAT return, but let's be honest here. There are not actual yardage markers where these people are receiving these balls at.
Correct.
And so it's like, what's the difference between 108 and 109? How's anybody possibly ever going to
really
know?
Exactly. So that's why there's probably a bunch of 109s, 108s in there because you really just don't know.
Really, honestly, I would just be super mad if I did that and someone was like, nope, 108. And I'm like, come on, dude. Like, my heel is right there.
Exactly.
I just ran 109 yards.
Put me in the record books. Put me at number 1 in the record books, man.
Yeah, if you want to say 107, okay. I was clearly short.
Right.
Don't give them 108.
Exactly.
108 should not exist.
I know.
And like in the NFL, you could absolutely do that. In college football, you could absolutely do that. Let's be honest. Unless it's the state championships, you're not going to be able to.
Well, especially like the 6-man schools
go back
too.
and
like
tell.
You can't, right. There were a couple of records on here that were 6-man records. But again, like you're not going to have the technology to really determine. Like,
right. Well, and that's another reason that had we put like most like highest point totals by a kicker,
right,
you have to separate 11-man and 6-man football because 6-man football, the extra point counts for 2.
Exactly.
Like, so you
it's
can't.
Different.
Yeah, it's literally different rules. And
it's
so
actually, I think it's bolded in the or it's not, maybe it's not bolded in the magazine, but there's asterisks by it, I think, that indicate if this is a 6-man record or not. So